And this is a topic near and dear to my heart because I had the opportunity to not only have mentors in my career, but also sponsors. And you're going to learn today, if you don't know the difference, we're going to talk a little bit about the definitions, why sponsoring leaders is so important. And so I wanted to start with just a little bit of information for you all to give you some context of why sponsoring is so important. So according to the Research Center, research done by the Center of Talent Innovation, people with active sponsors are 23% more likely to advance in their career. So it's a fairly significant number there. It's not that obviously we can't advance without sponsorship, but it really does help. And this is especially true for diverse candidates and women in particular. And according to a recent article at McKinsey, women tend to be chronically over-mentored and under-sponsored, and I can attest to that myself. And mentoring is fabulous. You know, it's wonderful. I'm a big advocate for it, and we all need mentors, but we also can benefit by sponsors. And so I thought that would give you some context. And let's also get a definition of sponsorship. And Tom and I were talking about this recently as well, because sponsorship and mentoring are slightly different. And I actually did some research to get a good definition here, and I took one from the Leadership Research Institute. So a mentor, of course, and is someone that will talk to you, will share their experience with you and contribute to your development. And it's a fabulous thing to have a mentor. And usually mentors can talk to you about a wide variety of things in your life, not just business. But sponsors take that step further. Sponsors are advocates for you. Sponsors are people that not just talk to you, but talk to other people about you. And when they talk to other people about you, then that is where the active advocacy comes in. And it's not again so much as just helping someone. It's actually getting a little bit more skin in the game, more risk involved from the actual sponsor to say, listen, I believe in this person. This person can do the job, and I want to put their name forward for the job. So if you think about a door, because this is another way of looking at it, a mentor is someone that will actually say, this is where the door is. This is what a door looks like. That's the handle of the door. So when you get to the other side, I'll meet you there and I'll continue to support you. Fabulous wisdom to show you where the door is, how to get through the, where the door is, how to open the door. But a sponsor will actually take you by the hand, go through the door with you, and push through the door, actually break down the door if they have to get through the other side. Okay, so that gives us some context of what we're going to talk about today and how important sponsorship is for people in their careers. So we're getting to the best part now. I'm finally going to introduce Mr. Tom ONeil. I want to do him justice and introduce him properly. Tom and I met 16 years ago. Tom actually is a very an icon in Canadian business, really. He started his career really with PwC and worked to lead the Canadian group, the American group, and finally was the global CEO of PricewaterhouseCoopers. Since that time, he's had a prestigious career as leading boards and being on boards. He's been on numerous boards of wide diversity on oil and gas boards with Nexen, on Queen's University and Sick Kids Hospital, but also on Loblaws. He was chair of BCE, which is one of the largest Canadian organizations, has some global impact as well, and most recently chair of Scotia Bank. So you can see you're in really good hands today on this topic. So we met 16 years ago. I was a new president of the same organization that he was a new board member of. And one of the first things he did was reach out to me to say, I want to meet some people on the ground. I want to know who you are. And I was like, oh, I'm not just a new president, but now I'm going to meet a board member. So he came and we met in my little tiny office. He used to have the smallest little office by the bathroom in this old building downtown Toronto. So we met there, and Tom said to me, we were getting to know each other, and he says, we're going to get along just fine. He says, just never bleep lie to me. So it was kind of funny, and we never did. And we had a great trusting relationship throughout the time I've known him. Some of the things that Tom did for me, and also my team, when I was president, he would show up and make himself available to me for my senior leadership team. He would meet for coffee. He would come and speak to our team, and we could ask him questions and have access to a board member. He would help me host a client event where he would bring in key people from the Canadian business community to speak. He would show up and present at our senior leadership team. And then when we were globally at global meetings in the organization, he would actually sit next to me, introduce me to other board members, talk to me, give me more visibility. So as much as he didn't specifically for me sponsor me to get my role, he actually did sponsor me just by giving me increased visibility within the organization and the amount of time he showed up for me and my team. So it's just amazing. Last week, and I'm going to get to Tom in just a second. Last week, I was just honored to attend an event on Tom's behalf, honoring Tom. There was 40 women in Canada that came out in Toronto to honor Tom for all of his legacy work with women and sponsoring women. And we had, presidents of organization, partners, board members. It was really, who's who, and I was honored and humbled to be among them, and to hear some of the stories of the work that Tom did. And I was actually, I'm learning all of this. I thought, I knew Tom had supported me and helped me. I did not realize that he had done so much for so many other successful leaders. And so he's humble as well. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to ask Tom some questions today about sponsoring. So welcome, Tom, to the circle. Can you unmute yourself, Tom? You just unmute the little microphone button there. If you hit it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction.
Great. So we're so excited to have you here and learn from you today. So you're so very passionate about sponsoring other leaders. So I wanted to start with asking you, does this come naturally to you, or did some event or experience prompt you to think about sponsoring? Like, did someone sponsor you when you started? Can you talk about that a little bit for us?
Sure. I think I had great sponsorship without really knowing it when I was back in high school and getting into university. Just on this definition, I like your definition of sponsor as an advocate as opposed to an advisor or counselor. So I'm using the term sponsor here as advocacy for someone.
Yes.
And my dad was a great teacher, so I thought back to that. But the real teacher to me on advocacy was being in Price Waterhouse then and now PricewaterhouseCoopers. And this would be true, I think, for law firms, accounting firms, partnerships in general, architects, engineers. And that is, in the good old days, an article clerk in the United Kingdom paid for the privilege to be taught at the accounting profession and then would be admitted into the firm. And it was obviously that if you had mentored the individual along the way and could become an advocate, that individual had a huge assist in being admitted into either employment or later into partnership. So I would say that the advocacy part of that profession taught me a lot, even as I was a new student and working my way up through the ranks. And I think that carried me through the day as kind of the most pervasive example of sponsorship or advocacy that I can think of.
Great. Good. And nice to hear you talk about your father too. That's, we can have certainly family members. Yeah, that's great. So what do you think are the top 2 to 3 must-haves for successful leaders? I'm sure people would like to hear from you on that.
Well, I think you're going to find this kind of a simple answer, but above average intelligence, and in that I include the emotional intelligence as opposed to just financial or other intelligence. Above average people skills, being able to work with teams, motivate teams, and in today's world, teamwork is a lot more necessary due to the complexity of some of the issues faced by institutions, including non-for-profit. And a dose of ambition, i.e. hunger, drive, whatever you want to call it, And then the last one I put is with an appropriate level of modesty. And I put that in because there are leaders who have no modesty, and we see some of them in politics. But I think great leaders have a good dose of modesty and don't have to have the sun shining on them all the time.
That is so true and so powerful. So when you think about your must-haves and you think about the people you sponsor, how do you determine who you're going to actively sponsor, Tom? Is it because, like, what makes a leader worth your time and commitment, your personal commitment? Is because they have demonstrated those qualities to you, or is there something else that you look for before you kind of commit to helping them out?
Well, I think there's different ways to look at the sponsorship. For example, some are transaction specific, and I use this as the sponsorship. People would like to join the ICD course. It's a training program for future directors, and it requires a sponsorship, actually a couple of sponsorship letters to satisfy the entrance requirements. And so I sign a lot of those or act on a lot of those, and that's as a result of a specific ask. And I would say the other sponsorships are likewise more situation specific, but more often than not, you see a person who has potential, but maybe not, it's latent in them, or maybe unexploited by them, where you see a future rosier than they may think, where I think you can really add value in a sponsorship program. I might say I'd rather mentor first and then sponsor than just sponsor, because you know them much better.
That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
Yeah, so that would be a starting point. And I think, to me, when you mentor and then sponsor and then see success, it's extremely personally satisfying to see that happen to an individual.
That was one of my questions around what are your personal rewards for supporting leaders.
Well, yeah, I'm sure a high school teacher or university professor who could see the results of their work 20 years later must take great pride. And that's what I'm talking about. I don't mean boastful pride. It's so great to see people succeed. And if you can share your experiences with them, by the way, when you're sharing your experiences with as a sponsor, you're learning as you go as well from the person that you're sponsoring. It's not a one-way street, and particularly with this generational gap, and at least in my life, learning how the 40-year-olds think today versus my generation is like night and day. So it's also an education for me.
Great. Humble still, modest still, Tom. So, one of the things that's interesting is that I was reflecting on, particularly after I attended the event last week, was showing up and supporting people takes a lot of time and commitment. If you think about over the years, some of the times that you supported me and my team. And you're obviously during that time you were, leading organizations, or, you were on 10 boards at the same time. So how did you make time and manage to make time for not only me, but the 40 other women? And I'm sure there's numerous other people besides the people that were in the room last week. So how do you make time for that? How do you prioritize it?
Well, I think your listeners should know, though, to be fair, Sandy, the fact is that the sponsorships that I've enjoyed so much were over a 40 to 45 year period. So when you sit in the room and see everything coming together at once, don't make a conclusion that it was all happening at the same time, because it wasn't. It's at different stages in life. And, you have, I had a great mentor in Bob Peterson at Imperial Oil. When I became CEO of a company for the first time, I asked him for advice. And he was a smoker. He took a tug on his cigarette. He says, well, there's 168 hours in a week. That was his advice. And his advice was meant to mean that you have to allocate your time to what's necessary, but also what's enjoyable. And I got to tell you, that being with people and mentoring people, and particularly if you're a leader, you've got to get into leadership succession issues. So, for example, as board chair of both the Bell and the Scotia Bank, one of my big jobs, and the board's big jobs, in addition to selecting the CEO and evaluating the individual, was future board chair selection. And I was delighted in that process because I was succeeded by people even more capable. And Gord Nixon from Royal Bank at Bell and Aaron Regent at Scotiabank. But anyway, one of the reasons I did it was self-enjoyment. I'd rather do that than something else. Something else probably suffered, whatever that was, probably detailed menial mental work is what suffered.
Well,
and as I said earlier, I learned from everybody, Sandy.
Yeah.
And when I was being mentored, I learned from many mentors, and I learned also some things that weren't necessarily constructive. In other words, you learn how not to do something.
That's very true. That is so true. Okay, so what would you recommend to other leaders and leaders on this call? I mean, the leaders on this call are kind of in two stages. They're very senior leaders that have a lot of experience, or they're new up and coming leaders. And what would you recommend to other leaders that perhaps don't prioritize this other sponsoring or haven't quite looked around to see who else they could sponsor yet? What would you recommend?
Well, if you can start with, to be selfish about it, the biggest shortage we have in industry and in institutions that are not-for-profit is talent. And the only way you get great talent is through mentoring and sponsoring in any organizations. It's irrespective of what that organization does. And I have been through many, many meetings on talent where we would like to move someone up and we don't have a replacement. And the person we'd like to move up, biggest challenge is to have a successor who's capable of doing his job. And therefore, a leader has to, I think, mentor and advocate and play an advocacy role for individuals if they want to be upwardly mobile. So that's just self-interest. But the other is, it is actually rewarding, as I said earlier. And in my, what dialed me up was interrelationships with people and seeing them succeed. So I don't think you can be a leader, or let me put it another way, it'd be tough to be a great leader if you're not actually mentoring and sponsoring some key people.
Mm-hmm. So true. Have you, this is going to be one that I'm going to send you a little curveball here, but have you had a situation where you've mentored someone and then sponsored them, or even just sponsored them, and then they haven't succeeded?
Yep. Maybe getting, well, that can happen for a variety of reasons, but basically, I've seen that particularly when in selecting CEOs in companies where you become at the board level a sponsor or an advocate. And if one picks a wrong CEO, the consequences are serious. So that has happened in my life. And what you got to do is move on. I've also, in a counseling role on difficult situations, not managed to succeed in turning anyone around to turn them into a leadership potential as an advocate. And but you're dealing with human beings, and none of us are perfect. And sometimes you encounter failure. It could be failure on my part, actually, as opposed to the failure of the individual I was dealing with. But yeah, you're going to fail. I think that's part of being human.
But it didn't deter you in any way from continuing to risk sponsoring.
Hey, I'm still a Maple Leaf fan. The answer is no.
Oh my gosh, that's very relevant. Oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, good. Well, it's good because, for people listening and thinking about sponsoring, there is a risk, right? As we talked about with advocacy, there's a risk. You're putting your reputation on the line, you're putting your name out there, and you're sticking your neck out a little bit. And if it does go if it does go wrong, then, you have to kind of, like you say, dust yourself off and continue on and keep, and not give up on the greater cause, because as we talked about earlier, it's 23% of people, it helps to have an active sponsor and make them more successful. So it's still very important, even if you get a little muddy sometimes.
One of the challenges, I think, in today's world about being able to have a sponsor is more and more of the distribution of work now electronically, and people can work remotely from wherever they actually get their check from.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to me, that's a challenge I didn't have in my life, but it's certainly in today's world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. The remote work environments and the remote working is definitely a challenge. Okay, so that's fabulous. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes now. I'm going to open it up for questions, and I've had a couple come in, so I've got a couple questions too. But let's open it up now, and I'm going to just go in and so everyone now can unmute themselves. And we're going to take some open questions now and go into that part of it. So does anyone have a question? I'm sure you've got lots of questions.